Hi guys, welcome to the second episode of JargOff. It's a very sunny day here, so I apologize for squinting, but I did want to sit outside. I am joined by a very good friend of mine, Richard, who does a business that I think is ideal for this podcast series. So yeah, over to you, Richard. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Richard. I'm a freelancer. I've been a freelance for about a year now. My job title, I would say, is data engineer, but that is kind of flexible based on what is required. I've got about 10 years experience in marketing technology, which is often shortened to MarTech. So I deal with things like analytics properties for websites and ad measurement for websites as well, and apps and products and things like that.
Yeah. What's your business called?
Thursdata is what it's called.
Like Thursday.
Like Thursday, but I changed the last letter to T and then added an A. Clever. Smart.
No,
It confuses everyone.
no. It's as good a name as any. I guess like my next question that I'm about to ask you, or the first question that I'm about to ask you, asks you to elaborate on what you do a little bit, which I think is important because data engineer can be confusing. It might imply like an IT
Sure.
specific role.
Yeah.
But I think we're talking about, like you say, analytics and like marketing activity.
Yeah.
So try and explain your business from the point of view of sort of why it exists to solve a need. So what are the users and clients that you might have, and what are their problems and challenges that bring them to using you?
So all my clients have websites, and they also have marketing that they need to do for those websites, and that usually involves digital platforms like Google Ads, Facebook Ads, Pinterest Ads, and as well as having an overall analytical view of the user journey on that website and the behavior of those users on those websites to be able to basically say how many people are making a purchase from this Google ad, how many people are, subscribing to the newsletter, or how many people are seeing this particular page or landing page. So what I essentially do is help facilitate the scripts that are required on the website to pass back that kind of user information to those analytics or ad properties. And essentially, I speak two languages. I speak the marketing language and the developer language. So often there's a bit of a barrier between the two because they both live in quite different worlds, I would say. But one kind of relies on the other.
Mm-hmm.
So I sit in between where I can speak to developers and I understand, all the languages that programming languages that they use and how the website stack that they use. And I can speak to the marketers and understand how they want their ads to be set up and what performance metrics they want to measure those ads against, and how the developers I basically speak with the developers and provide them with the scripts and the data schemas and technical setup that needs to be added to the website.
I'm going to jog off you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to jog off you on performance metrics because we'll talk about that in the next question. But schema.
Yeah, schema. So schema is just the word used to say how should this data or information be structured. So often you have things like dimensions and metrics in a database, and things like analytics and ad platforms have dimensions and metrics. So schema would just be what dimensions and metrics are required to measure the performance of this ad. So a schema would look like you have 5 dimensions, maybe the page, the location, the place that they came from, like platform wise. So did they come from Google search or things like that? And a metric might be how many users, how many purchases, usually a number based thing like that.
Yeah. I think I wasn't following you until you started giving examples.
Yeah.
It's quite, yeah. And throughout this, I think if I challenge you on terms, if you can qualify with examples, that's great. So before we get on to the next question, I guess just to drill down into like the need for your business a little more. I know that because of just the nature of larger businesses have bigger quantities of data, so they're more able to, get good insight from it.
Yeah.
Do you ever work with sort of smaller businesses in terms of helping them get set up with tracking and stuff? Like, can you talk a little on how you would maybe how your role changes for different people?
Yeah, definitely. And like, I think a lot of my work tends to revolve around smaller businesses because they don't have data teams to help them, set these things up. They're often the either 3-person, 4-person team, and it's the developer who has to set this up, but the developer's not a marketer. They don't know necessarily what the marketer needs, and the marketer doesn't necessarily know like how to ask the developer for things specifically to be set up. So I would say predominantly I work with kind of the smaller businesses. And that's usually where the problems lie, with the accuracy of the tracking and the accuracy of the ads performance as well. So yeah, but I do quite a bit of work with large scale businesses as well. I've worked with people like Specsavers and people like Formica, where you have a global website that has many different regions, and each region has its own tracking requirements and its own teams. So yeah, the requirements for both large and small can be very, very different in terms of data.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And from like just a layman's point of view, understanding data, like obviously, I don't think I need to lead you to say this. I think like the more data that you can understand, the better you can make changes to your site.
Mhm.
But you offer like rather than just seeing total visits, total amount spent on a site.
Yeah.
You're giving people a more granular level of data than that, right? When you're setting things up.
Yeah, definitely. If I'm not fixing it, I'm improving it in some ways. So there's many different stages of a website journey that people land on, and we might touch on this later, but I help facilitate the setting up of the smaller things that a user might do on a website. That's well, also the purchase and the larger scale things, but there are other smaller things that a user might do. You essentially want an end-to-end user tracked, so you get a full picture of how they interact with your site, how they engage with your content, and ultimately what leads them to a purchase or whatever you might be trying to lead them to.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that, isn't it? Like every step of along that funnel. If you get the top of it, like what I do as a content marketer is pulling people down into that initial top of the funnel awareness, getting them onto the site and making them start. But then there's other actions that people might take, like booking, get accessing a discount code, sign up a newsletter,
Yeah.
That was out on my brain's stuck.
Yeah, like in the car, going to checkout, things like that. If you don't have a full view of that entire journey, you might be missing out on huge opportunities to improve it in that particular area of the journey, because there could be users falling out of that funnel at any step. And if you don't have the data to say, I know why they're falling out of the journey, then you can't rectify why they're falling out of the journey.
Yeah, that's a good quote. I think that's the most compelling snippet answer to my question. You give people like the insight required to actually make impactful decisions to their bottom line, because without you there, it's just guesswork, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Great. Right. Well, on to the next one. So, second question. We talk about the sort of the jargon and the whole premise of this podcast, but obviously I call you out mid-conversation sometimes, but also I think the second question is a chance to address common jargon terms or buzzwords that you feel like your audience should probably know about. So we mentioned KPIs, and I just like to start this by saying I think that at a skeptic's view, the ultimate KPI, and KPI stands for key performance indicator, and really it just means like the numbers that matter. It's a number tied to your success. And for a lot of companies, the one that they focus on, or even if they pretend they don't, is like total revenue or sales or ROI, the big important money figure.
Yeah.
But I think where Richard adds a lot of value, and the reason I want to highlight KPI is I don't think that, even though that is ultimately what everyone cares about, that can't be the only metric you track. You have to be, there's a lot more that leads into that. Like, could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, every website has a user journey, and that kind of looks like a funnel. So you've got kind of the top of the funnel where you have a lot of users coming in from these adverts and
My job.
but yeah, exactly, from you, and they then step by step get closer to that final kind of purchase or KPI or whatever. But at each of those steps, there's kind of a micro KPI within them. So at each step, you're trying to get them to either, subscribe to a newsletter so you can remind them that you exist every month, or you maybe want them to add something to the basket. You maybe want them to go to the checkout. Those are the kind of the basic ones. But say if you were like the example we used before of the booking a holiday, you maybe want them to book a flight, and you maybe want them to sorry, towards the back of the funnel, you maybe want them to decide on which country they want to go to. You want them to decide on which dates they want to go to that country. So there's all these little kind of micro conversions, and at each of those points, you are basically trying to find the blockers between those points in the funnel. So you're basically trying to decide, is this point of the user journey, like deciding on a flight, maybe a real hard point for them to get past. And there could be little things that help you figure out, like the drop off through that flight journey. Did they click a link to another website? Did they go away and think about it and then come back the next day? So there's all these different like user engagement metrics you can use to increase the flow of users through that funnel to that end KPI, essentially.
Yeah. And how like when you do work for a client, like how involved is your role in like making recommendations based on that data, or is it just like you set up the data and then let them get away with it?
I generally I have done that in the past, but I generally just work with the technical side, so setting up those specific key metrics that they might want to see, as well as setting up the paid ads support for that ad performance, so that any scripts that need to be developed to allow you to put ads out there and then see the return on that investment.
Yeah, I was about to jog off you there on that, but that kind of sums it up, right? Like what as opposed to tracking on a website, what kind of things are you looking to track data wise for the ad? Is it just literally like clicks, or is it eyes on the ad versus how many clicks? Like, what could you?
So it works kind of differently for for an advert. There's impressions and clicks, and then a multitude of other things, but those are generally tracked on the page the ad was served. So generally, if you're talking about Google Ads or Facebook, usually Google or Facebook will track those metrics like impressions or clicks. But when they're on the site, what will happen is that ad will pass through a little identifier that says this person has clicked on this ad and went to your website, and then there'll be some technology on your site that I've set up that basically recognizes that they've clicked from this ad, and then follows them through the journey, and whatever else conversion wise you've got set up in that platform. Say Google Ads, you might have an add to basket, you might have a subscribe to newsletter, you might have a purchase event. Each time a user does that, it reads from which ad they clicked on, and then it sends that information back to Google Ads as to what they did from that ad. So yeah, essentially and those can be replicated across all the different platforms, essentially.
Yeah, and that would have been a good when I asked you what you did at the start. That would have been a good one to
Might have been a more efficient way of saying
that's
that.
a pretty good way of showing what you do, I think. Because otherwise it's all a bit. Yeah, I know that these separate ad tools have their own like reporting metrics, but like putting it all together is really like the value I think that Richard brings to people.
And it's complicated, and not all these platforms say the same thing. A lot of the issues I see people come to me with is, I have Google Analytics 4 and I have Google Ads and I've got Facebook, and they're all telling me something completely different. And that could be the technical setup, or it could just be your understanding of how these ad platforms make these decisions on basically how well these ads performed.
Okay, well, that leads us really well into my third question, where I always want people to re-lens what they do through an example, because I think that's one of the easiest ways to like understand the value of someone's business is to share an example. So without like naming a client's name or anything, can you share an example of like a problem or challenge a client had and how you approached it and solved it? And I'll call any JargOffs if it gets too technical or unclear. But I think you know what I mean.
Sure, yeah, and I think a good example is maybe a problem the client didn't even know that they had. So with this is specifically around Google Analytics 4, which I'm surprised hasn't come up very much yet, but it probably will a lot more. So essentially, what this client asked from me is just to review their website tracking, like full stack, just check everything works okay. Not really concerned that anything was majorly wrong, but had a feeling that there was some discrepancies there. And what I essentially come across when I dug into their setup was essentially everything they were seeing in Google Analytics, like page views, number of users, sessions, was basically double tracked. So from the real figure, everything was doubled, except for like your conversions, like purchase, add to carts and stuff like that. So what that essentially meant was their conversion rate was halved, essentially, because you got double the amount of users but the same amount of purchases. So
How did you identify that? Just from
when you go on a website, you can see the network requests going from the web page to the Google Analytics endpoint, and if you see a page view network request sending multiple times, and also if you go into the platform and you see maybe the user session length looks a bit weird, or the bounce rate looks a bit weird, well, engagement rate I should say, looks a bit strange. Like a good example was I used this as an example when talking to the client, but the number of pages per session was less than one. So you should have more. You should have either one page per session or more.
Yeah.
But if you had less than one page per session, that's a kind of an indicator that you've got two users but one page happening. So something's not right there. So to fix that problem, once I had a grip of what's going on, you essentially try and figure out where these scripts live. So for example, for this example, it was a Shopify site, and what had happened is the client had their developers maintain the marketing tracking scripts, which is pretty common and not all bad in any way. But what can happen is developers move in and out of the company. So, things like that can get lost, and also it's not the most intuitive thing to set up from that kind of back end perspective.
I think they don't like you're being kind here. I think the developers and I don't think any developer that watches this is going to mind me saying this, but like they don't have a massively high view of marketing.
No, definitely not. No.
Unless someone explicitly tells them you got to protect this code as it is, they're probably concerned more about other aspects of the site.
Absolutely.
So even in a non-malicious way, it just falls behind. And I think that's true of like it's worth me interjecting to point out that anyone watching this that has a site that's maintained by a developer or an IT company, and you have any kind of marketing tracking set up, like any iterations on your website or your technical product is going to change that, and you need to kind of re-review it.
Yeah, absolutely. No ill will to developers setting up modern technology incorrectly. It happens all the time, and that's why I kind of think there needs to be someone like me who exists between the developer and the marketer that can kind of speak both languages, because oftentimes developers can't speak marketing language, and marketing people don't understand how websites function really. So I was able to speak to the marketer and say, look, these events are being tracked twice. You've got way too many users in your Google Analytics platform than are actually on the website. So your conversion rates are completely whacked. And I could then go to the developer and say, let's identify where these scripts live, and we'll rectify this by just taking, what do we think is the best one? Can we improve it? And then lo and behold, once we take one of the scripts off, the number of users go down, which might sound like a bad thing to a lot of people, but that was actually the accurate number. And then the conversion rate actually went up. So they had a much better view of their how much their marketing efforts actually affected the amount of users on the website, and how many users actually converted to becoming a purchaser. And I think that's kind of really common, especially since Google Analytics or Google as a whole have this tendency to create new products and sunset old ones. And the most recent example of that is Google Analytics and Google Analytics 4, or Universal Analytics, I should say, was the previous version. Google Analytics 4. I saw a lot of people still have the old Universal Analytics on the website and then add the Google Analytics 4 set up to their website. And what Google tried to do was essentially say, right, all the people with the old Universal Analytics, we'll migrate you internally, so we'll still respect that old code and it'll still contribute to the data in Google Analytics 4. But then they'd already set up the Google Analytics 4 script, so that was also contributing data to the same property. So then you have both scripts doing the same thing, and it kind of spirals out of control from there. So I think that's certainly something to keep an eye out for, because it's not necessarily obvious when like more than the users you want. Often people get excited, oh yeah, more users, but it might be wrong.
Yeah, I mean it's a vanity. It not only is like just total users sort of a vanity metric anyway. If it's an inflated number, it's even worse, because, like you say, it pushes your actual important figures down.
Yeah.
I think what you just mentioned about analytics there. The final question is about like future threats, but I suppose analytics is like a now issue, so we can just talk about it now. From like an outside perspective, if you have a because a lot of people that maybe watch this podcast are small business owners themselves, or work at small agencies or stuff like that. Where I don't think a lot of people that are watching this are like MD in huge companies that have the vast quantities of spending data that you might work with. But for like a lower level person who maybe has analytics set up on their old sites, like on their website, or they think they did, what's changed now? Should I be going back and retroactively adding GA4 to my site, or has it happened automatically?
Well, it depends. For a lot of people who just kind of ignored it, it probably happened automatically. So if you just kind of let it be and hope that it fixed itself, it probably did. Google Analytics tried to basically say, try to use this new method of tracking, but we'll still respect the old method of tracking. So essentially, that's where you come into the issue of double tracking. But for a small business, it's not a great deal of people actually like GA4, that use GA4. Probably not a what's the word? I can't remember the word, but controversial. Probably not a controversial thing to say, but
I think there's nothing wrong with being critical of certain technology as well. Like,
no,
you know, and again, we're here as people that run our own businesses. Like, it's fine to say that it's not a great experience to use, and you know, like if you want to get value out of it, you should work with someone like Richard, because he can offer a level of value and familiarity with GA4 that the average person just doesn't have, or you know, that doesn't really want to have. I think a lot of people with data, I feel like it goes two ways, where people either completely undervalue it and just don't really, you know, they're like, oh, I'm not bothered. Like, my site's small, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
or as you start to grow, you become more involved with the data. But that's when, in a way, I feel like people's inexperience can make things worse, because you're getting people who maybe do people like me, who are involved in marketing and might think they can mess about with analytics a little, and maybe I can do a little, but really you need someone like Richard who and GA4. A good reason I'm going on about this is because I'm aware as well that GA4 is a bit of a nightmare for people.
Yeah.
And the more you can simplify that for people, the better. I think the more valuable your service is.
I mean, I think some people go so far as to say it's terrible. Like, GA4 is terrible. Like, especially when it first came out, really, people are really viscerally angry about it, because you know they didn't really have the option in the first place. And what GA4 serves in functionality that Universal Analytics didn't, is essentially towards companies that have both a website and an app, because it allows you to silo the information from both web and app into one property. So if both those platforms work in the same way, you essentially have all your data in one place.
Yeah, I almost JargOff today, because I feel like I'm not gonna feel it. I'm not here to internet. I'm not here to internet professor here, but siloing something to me means like you're splitting them and keeping them separate. But you're saying, you're saying almost the opposite, right? Combine.
You combine them into one beast, essentially. And the other function it kind of served was to enact the like big changes they needed to make towards privacy, and the new kind of AI driven statistical modeling tools that they wanted to implement, which will probably not serve the smaller businesses. Like those three things, which are essentially the core of GA4, would not serve a small business in any shape or form, really. Very well. So I sometimes don't recommend GA4 to smaller companies. It's useful to have, but a lot of small businesses often take it as gospel, like this is the absolute truth, but they maybe forget about the amount of people who use privacy browsers, the amount of people who don't click yes on the cookie banner, and including iOS, they block certain cookies on iOS as well, which can have an impact on attribution. So I think it's important to know that there's more options out there than just Google Analytics for.
What can you give it? What do you mean in terms of other options?
Well, you can. I think for a small business, just looking at like ad performance in the platform is probably going to help you out a lot more than, as long as it's set up in the best way possible, it's going to help you out a lot more than maybe looking in Google Analytics 4 is.
Yeah, so you mean like as in like going straight into like Facebook and checking?
Like straight into Google Ads, Meta, Search Console, stuff like that is going to give you a closer source of truth than Google Analytics 4.
But if you want to go on your own, like so Facebook tells you you've had like 10,000 impressions and 100 clicks or something. And you want to like verify that on you want to go to your website and see how those clicks have translated to traffic.
Well, if you're seeing 100 clicks, you'll probably never see 100 sessions in GA4 from those 100 clicks, because the like I mentioned, the privacy, the ad blockers and stuff like that will prevent that.
And there's no alternative for like your own website.
There is alternatives. There's I mean, obviously, like Shopify and stuff like that have their own internal analytics tool.
Yeah.
But that also more often than not adheres to like cookie privacy. But there are other analytics tools that are anonymize the data, so you can actually fire them before someone accepts cookies, which means you get a much closer, a much more direct view of how many people are coming on your website and where they're coming from before they accept to privacy and stuff like that. And then there's also like,
that seems a bit dodgy, isn't it?
It does. So essentially, like, it's the reason from what I understand, the reason why GA4 isn't allowed to measure users before they accept any cookies is because they include things like IP address with the data that they send, which is a personally identifiable piece of information, which is another piece of jargon, PII. So that's and we have laws like GDPR that prevent you from storing or sending that PII to other countries. Like Google is based in America, so sending that all the way to America is against like EU regulation.
So it's data. We're talking about data that isn't just like X number of visitors on your site. It's stuff like I could actually identify a human being.
It's like what city they're in, what browser they're using, and that's not necessarily PII, but attached to an IP address and things like that. And like Google Analytics 4 also consumes like things like user ID. So you might have a specific account ID for a user. You have things like email and phone number that Google can use to more accurately match that user to a certain ad or things like that. So that's why it's a bit like they don't want to track before a cookie banner. But there are alternatives. One that I like to suggest is Mattermost, which basically circumvent that by not collecting things like IP address or personally identifiable information. It's just like a flat number of this is how many users you have. This is where we think they came from based on the signals we got from adverts, and this is where we think they're based and how many purchases they made. So you'll not get the granularity or the quality of data that you would with something like GA4. But if you're a smaller business, you might not necessarily want the quality. You might prefer the quantity to make more informed decisions from.
And I suppose as well, it's like it's a lot of people are not necessarily as concerned with like things like user demographic as they are like activity on
exactly,
like how many pages you've
totally. And I see small businesses that maybe get like 5 or 10 users a day on their site trying to make decisions from GA4. I'm like, that's not enough information. So like that's maybe a slice of the pie that is actually visiting your site. So I think it's important. Maybe one term I would maybe use is measure twice, cut once. With analytics is like you can set up multiple analytics tools and compare them against each other, and that can help you make much better decisions than just relying on one to make all of your decisions from.
That's a good idea. Yeah. So for the last question, it's kind of an open-ended one, really. It's just what are like upcoming problems and challenges in your industry you think people should be aware of, and it doesn't necessarily have to be challenges that like a small business might face with analytics. It could also be a challenge you personally as an entrepreneur in what you do, something you're aware of. Like the last episode we talked about generative AI and its impact on search results. So any topic like that, really.
I think the conversation that's been going on for a while in my kind of field is privacy and the implications that has on measuring your marketing efforts. There's been a kind of a big push in the last 3 to 4 years in reducing the amount of third-party cookies that you can put on the site, or in terms of reducing the amount of third-party cookies that advertising platforms can put on your site. As well as
I was about to try and clarify third-party cookies, but you just did in a way. It's like they cook like cookies that store your browsing history that come from an external source.
essentially what they were designed to do was you had a a marketing platform like Facebook. You put a Facebook script on your website, and then that would put a third-party cookie on your website that assigned that browser with an ID, and then that ID would follow them around everyone else's website. So Facebook basically had this broad view of everything you looked at across. As long as those scripts were on those websites, it could tie you your journey on the web across all these different websites as one user. So that's been under question for years. Is that the best practice way of doing things? And it's slowly been kind of phased out. And I think Chrome's kind of the last browser standing in terms of still allowing in some cases, but they have their own kind of this sandbox initiative to phase out third-party cookies, which has been delayed, but it will eventually happen. And with that, you kind of had these new emerging technologies, and one of them is this thing called CAPI, which maybe paid marketing people would have heard about. But essentially this new methodology, or a new way of sending customer information, where like behavior on the website, back to things like Google Ads or Facebook, without using third-party cookies. So it essentially, what it does is, instead of using the browser to send that information, you have a server either in a cloud or on site that runs a little containerized marketing script machine. And when your site is loaded and people do things on your site, the information isn't sent from the browser anymore. It's then sent from the server instead. So what you can essentially do is say, instead of this information going to Facebook, it looks like it's going back to your site, and then that server passes the information back on to Facebook, circumventing the whole, like, it also kind of circumvents ad blockers as well, because ad blockers usually try and identify ads from based on where they come from or where the information's going, like in Google Analytics.com or Google Ads.com, which this kind of completely circumvents, because it just goes back to your example.com domain.
Is that not essentially just the, like, it's just trying to pass, like, it's just trying to step over the privacy.
It's a proxy essentially to get around it. It's not stepping over, because you should still require consent to send that information, but you step around things like ad blockers and third-party cookies, because you collect the data on a server essentially and pass it on. But they can be used for other things, like tracking offline conversions. Like if you have a system where you track how many sales you made in the shop, you can pass those on into the server, and that can pass it on into Google Analytics or Google Ads in its own way. So there are other uses for it, but I've generally seen them, essentially Facebook and Google are pushing, like, you should have CAPI to get the best quality metrics for your ad performance.
So who is it that's like, what's the responsibility of the business owner in terms of CAPI? Like, you have to, like, enable it, or like you have to get your own server?
So either you pay someone else to set it up, someone like me, or you pay a third-party platform to run that server, or if you have the capacity to run your own servers, you can run it internally yourself. which to be fair gives you a lot more control over what information you said. And a great guy that speaks about this is a guy called Simo Ohava, who he basically talks about this isn't necessarily trying to circumvent things, it's actually trying to give you more control over privacy as well, because you can be a bit more ethical about, I don't necessarily want to send that piece of information to Google Analytics or Google Ads or Facebook. Therefore, in the server, I can say, right, omit that and just send the information I want to send, essentially.
Okay.
So it's got a bit of a checks and balances kind of thing to it. But back to the original point, in the future, I think privacy is a much bigger focus than it used to be. When I started out about 10 years ago in this, it was a bit of a wild west and nobody really cared about the cookie banner or what it did. Half the time it probably never worked. Now they're a lot more standardized and even tested. You can test different cookie banners to see how well or how likely someone is to accept the cookie banner or decline, which would improve the rate at which you could collect information. So yeah, that the shift of focus has suddenly gone towards privacy in the last, say, 5 years.
Yeah. Do you think that? I mean, I think like the more private people want to be online,
Yeah.
the less able marketers are to access data.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there? CAPI, I guess, is kind of striking a middle ground there, but like, in a world where people are hesitant to share their data, like, where does that leave, like, the marketing industry, do you think?
Well, I think there are other alternatives that'll come in. As I spoke to someone about this today, but there's this thing called mixed model marketing, where you essentially train a model based on how many. It's quite tricky to explain because there's a lot of statistics and maths involved. But what you essentially do is you give this model the number of impressions and clicks that your ads got, and you can circumvent all of like Google Analytics or KPI tracking entirely by just saying, this is how many purchases we got this month. This is how much we spent on ads on Facebook, Google, etc. For the last 3 months. And this model will essentially say, right, based on how much you spent, how many eyes looked at these ads, and how many purchases you then got later on, without looking at any other data, it'll then say, right, we think the most statistically correct ROI is this for this marketing platform. So it's more of a guess, but it's reducing the kind of reliance on privacy limited data, and you kind of using a more statistical way of figuring that out.
Thank you. The sun,
I can see you getting blank
because it's dropping down, and as much as I'm enjoying shooting this outside, it's becoming an issue the lower it gets. So I think we'll probably have to start wrapping things up. Richard, I guess, we've talked about what Richard does here, and again, just to reiterate a point, I think Richard fulfills a really important middle ground between marketing teams and development teams, and bringing that together from a data and analytics point of view. But Richard, like, you should use this opportunity to just give yourself a little plug and just tell people how they can get in contact with you or learn more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. You could. I'm the majority of my presence is on LinkedIn. You can find me at Richard Dennis or thursdata.com. And my email is richard@thursdata.com if you want to reach me. I'll plug my art Instagram as well, richard.dennis.art, if you want to see some of my art.
Richard is a really good artist, which I feel like is relevant in when we're talking about mass-produced Gen AI rubbed slop. It's nice to see someone using like their hands to create beautiful
things. Very much, yeah. It's nice to do it as well. Yeah, when you spend your life looking at a screen like I do, it's nice to do something that isn't that.
I agree, 100%. And yeah, thank you so much for Richard's time. Thanks for we're at Richard's house, so thanks for letting me come down and chew your ear off about it.
You got one?
Yeah, so find Richard where he said. I'll leave some links in the stuff below. And as always, I'm Craig from Content by C, and you can either find me at contentbyc.co.uk or craig@contentbyc.co.uk if you need to email me for something. But yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.